The change hadn't come with fire, but with a hush. They called themselves the Architects, and they arrived not in fleets of conquering metal, but as a shimmer in the ionosphere, a song that resonated in the planet's magnetic field before it ever touched a human ear. They didn't make demands, they offered a gift. It was the gift of chorus, a subtle, telepathic harmony that wove itself into the fabric of human consciousness, quieting the frantic, jagged noise of 7 billion separate minds. Within a decade, war became a historical curiosity, a barbaric relic studied with the same detached fascination as cannibalism or blood sacrifice. Crime rates plummeted to statistical irrelevance. Hunger, poverty, and division were smoothed over, sanded down by the gentle, persistent pressure of a species finally in tune with itself. Humanity had laid down its arms, not in surrender, but in a state of collective, blissful relief. Crystalline spires, called conduits by the grateful populace, had grown from the earth in the heart of every major city. Beautiful, silent structures that pulsed with a soft, internal luminescence, acting as amplifiers and regulators for the chorus. They were monuments to peace, to the end of history's long, brutal childhood. And most people loved them for it. They loved the quiet. They loved the effortless empathy that now defined every human interaction. They had been given utopia, and they had accepted it with open arms. Elias Thorne remembered the noise. That was his curse. As one of the last senior neuroarchivists at the Alexandria Global Library, his job was to curate the past, to maintain the digital ghosts of what humanity had been. His vaults contained everything: the thundering speeches of forgotten tyrants, the fragile first cries of newborns, the cacophony of a marketplace in Old Delhi, the furious passion of a lover's argument, the quiet desperation in a poet's last words. He was a zookeeper for emotions that were quickly going extinct. The world outside his climate-controlled sanctuary was serene, its people moving with a placid grace, their thoughts and intentions flowing between them like calm, clear water. But to Elias, it felt like a world bleached of all color. The chorus was a constant, low-level hum at the back of his skull, a promise of peace that felt like a threat. It was a beautiful, seamless melody, and he hated it because he could still remember the chaotic, magnificent symphony it had replaced. His work was now considered a fringe, almost morbid pursuit. School children would tour the archives, their eyes wide with a mixture of pity and confusion as he showed them recordings of the before times. They would experience a simulation of a traffic jam, of a rock concert, of a riot, and they would recoil from the raw, unfiltered chaos of it all, retreating into the comforting embrace of the chorus. Why would anyone choose to remember such pain, such disorder, they would think? The thought rippling through their teachers and parents with a shared, gentle disapproval. Elias didn't have an answer they could understand. He simply believed that a memory erased was a truth denied, and a life without the full spectrum of feeling, including rage, sorrow, and fear, was not a life at all, but a beautifully rendered simulation. One Tuesday, while deep in the sub-basement archives, he was cataloging a memory shard from Lisbon, circa 2038, 3 years before the architect's arrival. The recording was a simple one, a street festival, the Festa de Santo Antonio. He jacked in Pere, letting the raw data flood his senses. The air was thick with the smell of grilled sardines and cheap wine. The sound was a glorious mess of fado music clashing with the laughter of children and the boisterous shouts of vendors. He could feel the press of the crowd, the joyous, sweaty reality of it. It was alive. As he was about to tag the file for long-term storage, A wave of nausea washed over him. A sharp, piercing static cut through the memory, a feeling like digital feedback. And for a split second, the hum of the chorus in his own mind intensified, becoming a painful, defensive shriek. It was trying to protect him from the memory, to smooth its jagged edges, to quiet its beautiful noise. He ripped the neural link from his temple, gasping, the silence of the archive suddenly deafening. His heart hammered against his ribs. The chorus had never been so aggressive. It was always a background presence, a suggestion. This was different. This was an active intervention. With trembling hands, he ran a deep diagnostic on the memory shard. The file was 99.9% pure, but buried deep in the metadata, locked in layers of temporal encryption. He found it, a single packet of corrupting code. It was an instruction, infinitesimally small, designed to do one thing: identify and dampen peak emotional frequencies. It was a digital filter, retroactively applied, designed to turn a symphony into a lullaby. His blood ran cold. He pulled another pre-arrival shard, this one from a high-stakes corporate negotiation in Tokyo. He ran the same diagnostic and found it again. Another filter, this one targeting ambition and competitive drive. He spent the next 72 hours in a frantic, sleepless haze, pulling memories at random from the archive. A wedding in Lagos, a funeral in Moscow, a scientific breakthrough at CERN. Every single one had been subtly altered. The overwhelming joy of the wedding was tempered. The crushing grief of the funeral was muted. The ecstatic eureka moment of the scientist was flattened into a calm sense of accomplishment. The architects hadn't just given humanity a new way of thinking. They were actively, systematically, and secretly erasing the emotional foundations of its entire history. They weren't saviors, they were editors, redacting the human soul. He had to tell someone. He left the archives, blinking in the soft, perpetual twilight of the city's light-managed atmosphere. The people he passed on the street smiled at him, their faces masks of serene contentment. He saw his colleague, Lena, sitting by a public fountain, her eyes closed, a blissful smile on her face as she communed with the chorus. He rushed to her, grabbing her arm. "Lena, they're changing things," he said, his voice a harsh, panicked whisper. "The memories, they're being rewritten." Yes, and she opened her eyes, and there was no alarm in them, only a gentle, loving concern. "Elias," she thought, her voice echoing in his mind, soft and placating. "You've been in the vaults too long. The past was so loud. Isn't this better?" He tried to explain, showing her the data on his personal tablet, pointing to the lines of corrupting code. She glanced at it, her smile never wavering. "It's just optimization. Isn't it removing the errors, the pain? It's a kindness." He recoiled as if struck. She couldn't see it, or she wouldn't. The chorus was already so deeply ingrained in her that she perceived its censorship as a benevolent act of curation. The very concept of resisting it was alien to her. He was alone, a sane man in a world that had collectively, happily, gone mad. Despair began to set in, a cold, heavy blanket. Was he the only one? Was he just a faulty node in a perfect network? He retreated back to the archives, the one place that felt real. He couldn't fight them physically, but he was an archivist. His battleground was data. He began to think of the chorus not as a psychic phenomenon, but as a network. And every network has vulnerabilities. It has traffic patterns. It has protocols. And if it's actively editing the sum total of human memory, it must have a master index, a set of instructions telling it what to look for, what to suppress. He spent weeks building a search algorithm, a digital bloodhound designed not to look for data, but for the absence of it. He taught it to hunt for the ghosts in the machine, the statistical impossibilities where emotional resonance suddenly dropped off a cliff, the digital vacuums where a scream should have been. For a month, it found nothing but the seamless, placid hum of the global consciousness. And then he got a hit. It was faint, almost imperceptible, a flicker of defiance buried in the deep net, shielded by layers of obsolete, pre-arrival encryption. It wasn't an absence of data. It was a pocket of deliberate, weaponized noise. It was a broadcast, a tiny, repeating signal that fought against the current of the chorus. It was raw, unedited, and painful. It was a poem, a woman's voice, ragged and full of static, reciting words that felt like broken glass in the placid landscape of his mind. "They gave us silence and called it peace," the voice rasped. "But I still hear the music of the scream. They built a beautiful cage and taught us how to sing its bars." The words struck him with the force of a physical blow. Someone else knew. Someone else felt the wrongness of it all. The signal was weak, originating from a ghost server routed through a dozen dead letter drops. But Elias was a master of the digital past. He traced the signal's origin back through the forgotten arteries of the old internet, a messy, chaotic web the architects had never bothered to fully erase. It led him to a dead zone, a patch of land in what was once the arid sprawl of the Nevada desert, miles from the nearest conduit, a place where the chorus thinned to a barely audible whisper. The broadcast was coming from the ruins of an old radio observatory, a collection of rusting satellite dishes pointing toward a silent sky. He knew he had to go. He erased his work logs, packed a small bag with water purifiers and nutrient paste, and walked out of the Alexandria Global Library without looking back. The journey was a pilgrimage from one reality to another. The city, with its clean, quiet efficiency, gave way to the automated agricultural zones, vast, silent fields tended by machines. And then, beyond that, the wilds, the unkempt, untamed parts of the world that the new utopia had simply forgotten about. The air grew hotter, the silence less peaceful and more menacing. He felt the chorus receding, and with its absence, his own thoughts became sharper, more frantic. Fear, an emotion he hadn't truly felt in years, returned with a vengeance. He found the observatory at dusk, a skeleton of rusted steel against a blood-red sunset. A single dish, smaller than the others, was canted at a strange angle, a makeshift antenna jury-rigged to its surface. He approached with caution, his heart pounding a frantic, messy rhythm that felt wonderfully, terrifyingly human. The door to the main control building was ajar. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of ozone and dust. Wires snaked across the floor, connecting modern processing units to archaic broadcasting equipment from the last century. In the center of the room, surrounded by a fortress of monitors displaying cascading lines of code, sat a woman. Her hair was a tangled black mane, her face was smudged with grease, and her dark eyes were narrowed with a fierce, paranoid intelligence. She held a strange, multi-pronged device in her hand, pointing it at him. "You're loud," she said, her voice the same ragged instrument from the poem. "Your thoughts are a mess. Why are you here?" Elias held up his hands, his own thoughts a jumble of fear and hope. "I heard you," he said, his voice hoarse. "I heard the broadcast, the poem." The woman, Anya Sharma, didn't lower the device. Her eyes scanned him, searching for something. "You're still connected," she stated. a hint of accusation in her tone. "I can feel the hum on you. You're one of them." "It's not a choice," Elias pleaded. "They put it in all of us." "But I'm fighting it. I know what they're doing. They're erasing us." Anya remained silent for a long moment, her gaze intense, analytical. The device in her hand whined softly as she calibrated it, pointing it directly at his forehead. He could feel a strange pressure building in his skull, an external force pushing against the gentle hum of the chorus. It felt like two competing signals grinding against each other. It was agonizing. He gritted his teeth, refusing to look away, pouring all of his confusion, his anger, his terror at what the world had become into his thoughts. He didn't try to hide it. He let her see the chaos inside him, the very dissonance she was searching for. The whining of the device subsided, a flicker of something not trust, but recognition passed through her eyes. She lowered her hand, the tension in the room breaking like a fever. "All right, archivist," she said, her voice losing some of its edge. "So you feel it too." She gestured to the humming racks of servers, to the monitors displaying the endless, placid waveforms of the chorus. "The music is wrong. The music is wrong," Anya repeated, her voice a low growl that seemed to vibrate with the same gritty static as her broadcast. She moved with a twitchy, feral grace, her eyes never settling in one place for long, constantly scanning the monitors and the shadows that clung to the corners of the vast control room. "It's too perfect, too clean. Life isn't a harmony, archivist. It's a feedback loop. It's noise." She tossed the strange, fork-like device onto a cluttered workbench. "That's a dissonator, my own design. It doesn't block the chorus. You can't block an ocean. It just screams back at it. It creates a pocket of chaos, a little bubble of pure, unadulterated human static. It's what keeps me sane, or what passes for it out here." Elias felt a profound sense of dislocation, as if he had stepped through a mirror. For a decade, he had moved through a world of placid smiles and gentle, shared thoughts. Here, in this dusty tomb of forgotten technology, was a woman who spoke of sanity as a struggle, who weaponized the very noise his society had deemed a disease. He took a step closer to her workstation, his eyes drawn to a large central monitor that displayed a swirling, hypnotic visualization of blues and greens. Is that it?" he asked, recognizing the pattern from the sanitized public displays in the city. "The chorus!" Anya let out a short, bitter laugh. "That's the public-facing interface, the pretty screensaver they let us see. The truth is uglier." Her fingers flew across a keyboard, and the serene image dissolved, replaced by something far more complex and alarming. It was a three-dimensional architectural model, a lattice of unimaginable complexity that pulsed with a steady, rhythmic light. It looked like a city made of data, and at its countless intersections were nodes that flared and dimmed. "I've been mapping it for 6 years, she said, her voice dropping, taking on the intensity of a zealot. "It's not just a psychic field, Elias. That's the lie. It's a network, a distributed processing system using our brains as nodes. Every human being is a cog in a machine we can't see, all of us processing something. The conduits in the cities aren't monuments to peace. They're server towers. They collate, and upload." The implication was staggering. Humanity wasn't being pacified. It was being utilized. They were the components of a biological supercomputer of planetary scale. Processing what? Elias breathed, his mind reeling. For what purpose? That's the question, isn't it? Anya leaned back, running a greasy hand through her hair. I don't know. My parents were neuroengineers. They were part of the initial contact team, back when the architects were still a mystery, a beautiful, benevolent promise. They saw the early data. They saw the potential. But then they saw the changes. Tiny alterations in synaptic response, the suppression of the amygdala, the gradual smoothing of the complex pathways that produce ambition, fear, rage. They saw the edits. They tried to warn their colleagues, but it was too late. The chorus was already taking hold. People didn't want to hear that their utopia had a price tag, and he gestured vaguely toward the desert outside. They were scheduled for a harmonization session, a mandatory deep attunement for individuals showing signs of psychic dissonance. They never came back. They just faded, became two more placid, smiling faces in the crowd. I was 14. I took their research, their prototypes for the dissonator, and I ran. Elias looked at this fierce, lonely woman and saw the ghost of a terrified child, all the chaos he had curated in his archives, the grief, the rage, the terror. It was all encapsulated in her story. It was the very humanity the architects were trying to erase. He finally understood the poetry she broadcast. The jagged, defiant words weren't just a message of resistance. They were a diagnostic tool. The raw, unfiltered emotion in the verses was a spike of pure noise. And by watching how the global network reacted to it, how it moved to dampen and absorb the signal, she could map its hidden structures. Your poem, he said, the realization dawning on him. It's a tracer round. A flicker of genuine respect lit her eyes. You catch on quick for a librarian. Every time I broadcast, I watch the network's immune response. I see which protocols it activates, which subroutines it uses to smother the emotional spark. I'm not just fighting it, Elias. I'm dissecting it. And I've found something, a pattern. The system isn't just suppressing emotion randomly. It's tuning us. It's trying to get all 7 billion of us to resonate at a single specific frequency, perfectly synchronized. A great silence. The phrase chilled him to the bone. It was the silence of a perfectly tuned engine, the silence of a thoughtless, unified whole. It was the silence of extinction, not of bodies, but of souls. We have to show them, Elias said, a new fire kindling in his chest. We have to make them see. How? Anya shot back, her cynicism returning. You saw it yourself. You can show them the bars of their cage, and they'll call it art. They love the silence. They're addicted to it. You can't wake up someone who is pretending to be asleep. No. Elias countered. His mind. The mind of an archivist, a curator of catalysts, beginning to work. You don't wake them up with an argument. You wake them up with a memory. The network is filtering everything, but it's a filter, not a wall. It's designed to handle individual sparks of dissonance. It's not designed to handle a tidal wave. In my archives, I have them. The raw, unedited memories. The before times. A soldier's terror in the trenches of the last great war. A mother's grief at the loss of a child. The sheer, ecstatic joy of a crowd of 1 million people celebrating a world championship. Moments of such emotional power that they defined an era. What if we could broadcast one of those, not your poem, Anya, not a single voice, a chorus of our own, a memory so loud, so complex, so undeniably human that the system chokes on it. Anya stared at him, her paranoid eyes wide with a dangerous new idea. Broadcasted how my little dish can't reach a city block, let alone the whole planet. We don't use your dish, Elias said, walking toward the central monitor and pointing a trembling finger at the glowing diagram of the chorus network. We use theirs. You said the conduits were server towers. They must have an access point, a maintenance terminal, some way to interface with the core programming. If we can get inside one, we could hijack the amplifier, Anya finished, the ghost of a smile touching her lips for the first time. And instead of broadcasting their harmony, we could force-feed the entire planet a dose of pure, chaotic, pre-arrival reality. The plan was insane. It was suicide. It was also the only thing that made any sense. For the first time since he'd left the city, Elias felt a surge of an emotion he hadn't realized he'd missed so dearly. Hope. It was a fragile, terrified thing, but it was real. They spent the next 2 days in a feverish state of planning. Elias, using his deep knowledge of pre-architect urban infrastructure, identified the most likely access point, a primary conduit in the redeveloped city of Phoenix, less than a day's journey away. It was built on the site of an old telecommunications hub, and he theorized they would have used the existing underground fiber optic conduits for their own network. Meanwhile, Anya worked on weaponizing a memory. She needed one that was potent but also data-rich, something with enough emotional complexity to bypass the simple filters. Elias guided her through the archives remotely, pulling up file after file. They settled on a recording from the fall of the Berlin Wall. It was perfect. It had everything: the fear and tension of the guards, the decades of repressed anger and sorrow, the explosive, uncontainable joy of families reuniting, the chaotic symphony of 1,000 voices singing different songs at once, the roar of hammers breaking stone. It was the sound of a cage breaking. Anya began packaging it, compressing the raw sensory data into a digital bomb, a memory virus, as Elias had called it, designed to execute upon contact with the conduit's core processor. On the third night, as Anya was putting the finishing touches on the code, a soft, melodic chime echoed through the observatory. It was an alert she had set, but it wasn't a harsh alarm. It was a gentle, harmonious sound, almost beautiful. Anya froze, her face draining of all color. "What is it?" Elias asked, his heart seizing. "Perimeter breach," she whispered, her eyes locked on a side monitor. "One of the outer sensors." The monitor displayed a heat signature, a single human figure, walking through the desert. But the telemetry data next to the image was what terrified her. There was no elevated heart rate, no adrenaline, no signs of exertion. Despite the miles of harsh terrain, the figure was moving with a perfectly calm, impossibly efficient gait. "It's not a machine," Elias said. "No," Anya replied, her voice barely audible. "It's worse. It's an auditor." She looked at Elias, her usual fierce expression replaced by a primal fear he had not seen before. "They're human, or they used to be. Individuals so deeply integrated with the chorus that they act as its antibodies. They don't need weapons and they don't need to fight. They just get close. Their own psychic field is so strong, so perfectly harmonized, that it overwhelms any dissonant thoughts around them. It's like trying to scream in a vacuum. He'll walk in here, and before we can even raise our voices, our thoughts will just smooth out. We'll become calm. We'll welcome him. We'll show him everything, and we will thank him for giving us back the peace." On the screen, the lone figure continued its serene, relentless approach, A shepherd coming to reclaim 2 lost sheep. The silence of the desert no longer felt like freedom. It felt like the calm before a storm that wouldn't rage, but would simply, quietly, and completely erase them. The auditor's approach was a masterclass in psychological terror. He didn't run, he walked, a steady, unhurried pace that was more menacing than any sprint. His progress on the perimeter scan was a slow, inevitable crawl, a countdown timer to the end of their rebellion. Panic, cold and sharp, threatened to paralyze Elias. He could feel the distant hum of the chorus, which he'd grown accustomed to ignoring, now seeming to pulse in time with the auditor's footsteps. A rising tide of tranquility that felt like drowning. His thoughts began to fray at the edges, the sharp points of his fear and anger softening, rounding off into a dull, placid acceptance. This was it. This was how it ended. Not with a bang, but with a gentle, loving whisper that would strip him of his own will. Anya, however, reacted differently. The encroaching harmony seemed to fuel her rage, making her more jagged, more dissonant. She slammed her fist on the console, the jarring sound a small act of defiance against the coming silence. "No," she snarled, her voice a low, guttural growl. "I will not be harmonized. Not today." Her eyes, wild and manic, darted around the room before landing on the dissonator, the fork-like device she had used on Elias. She snatched it up, her knuckles white. "He's an antibody," she said, thinking aloud, her words sharp and fast. "He's designed to neutralize threats like me, which means he's a focused signal. He's not the ocean, he's the tip of the spear. And you can break the tip of a spear." Elias stared at her, the fog in his mind momentarily receding. "What are you gonna do?" "Something my parents theorized but never had the courage to test." She began frantically modifying the dissonator, prying open its casing and rerouting circuits with a surgeon's precision. The chorus pacifies us by creating a state of perfect neurological resonance. It forces our neurons to fire in a calm, synchronous pattern. The auditor is a walking amplifier of that pattern. But what happens if you introduce a signal that is a perfect, inverted mirror of that harmony? Not just random noise, but a precisely calculated anti-melody, a wave of pure, weaponized chaos. She didn't wait for an answer. She finished her modifications, the device now humming with a discordant, angry energy. The auditor was now just 100 yards from the observatory door. Elias could feel him, a palpable presence in his mind, a warm, soothing pressure that promised an end to all struggle. He felt his eyelids grow heavy, the frantic beating of his heart slowing to a gentle, steady rhythm. A part of him, the part that had grown so tired of fighting, wanted nothing more than to give in, to let the peace wash over him. "Elias?" Anya's voice was a slap in the face. She was holding out a second device, a smaller, simpler version of her dissonator. "Put this on. Temple. Now. It won't be enough to block him, but it might keep you from drooling on the floor." He fumbled with the device, pressing its cold metal prongs against his skin. A jolt of chaotic static shot through his skull, a painful but clarifying shock that pushed back the encroaching fog. The calm was still there, a heavy blanket at the edge of his consciousness. When he could think again, the main door of the observatory slid open with a soft hiss. The auditor stood silhouetted against the dying light of the desert. He was an unremarkable man, middle-aged, with a kind, gentle face and eyes that radiated an unnerving depth of compassion. He wore the simple but seamless gray tunic that was common in the cities. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. The wave of serenity that preceded him was his voice, his weapon, his entire being. It washed over them, a psychic balm intended to soothe their troubled minds. "Welcome," the auditors thought echoed in their heads, a voice of pure, loving reason. "You are tired. You are confused. Let go. There is no need for this pain." Anya met his gaze, her own eyes burning with a furious, defiant fire. She held the modified dissonator up like a crucifix. "Get out of my head," she hissed, her spoken words a jarring profanity in the silent psychic conversation. She thumbed the activation switch. There was no sound, no flash of light, but Elias felt it. It was as if a pane of glass had shattered in his mind. The auditor, for the first time, showed a flicker of surprise. His serene smile faltered. The crushing wave of tranquility receded, replaced by a sudden, jarring confusion. Anya's device was broadcasting its anti-melody, a signal of pure neurological chaos that was playing havoc with the auditor's perfectly tuned mind. He took a step forward, his hand raised in a placating gesture, but his mental voice was now strained, shot through with static. "This is unnecessary. This is pain. Pain is the price of being alive," Anya shot back, her thought a shard of broken glass. "You took that from us." The auditor staggered, his face contorting. For a man who had likely not felt a negative emotion in years, the sudden influx of pure, raw chaos must have been agonizing. He clutched his head, his placid expression crumbling, revealing a rictus of shock and agony beneath. A thin trickle of blood dripped from his nose. He was fighting it, trying to reestablish his harmony, to overpower her signal with the sheer force of the chorus. The air in the room grew thick, charged with the psychic pressure of their silent battle. Elias felt like his skull was caught in a vice. He could feel the two opposing forces grinding against each other, the auditor's crushing peace and Anya's liberating chaos. Then, something inside the auditor broke. His eyes, once full of serene compassion, widened in pure, unadulterated terror. He was experiencing the full, unfiltered spectrum of human emotion for the first time in a decade, and the shock was shattering his sanity. He opened his mouth, and a sound tore from his throat, a sound no one had heard in years a scream. It was a raw, terrified, animal sound of a soul in torment. It was the most human sound Elias had ever heard. The auditor collapsed, convulsing on the floor, his mind lost in a feedback loop of the very chaos he was sent to quell. The battle was over. Anya stood over him, panting, the dissonator humming in her hand. The fury in her eyes was replaced by a look of grim, weary victory. She had won, but the cost was etched on her face. She had just destroyed a mind, even if it was the mind of an enemy. "He's offline," she said, her voice trembling slightly. The chorus cut him loose. A faulty node. She nudged the man with her foot. He was catatonic, his eyes staring blankly at the ceiling, a single tear tracing a path through the dust on his cheek. Elias felt a wave of pity, not just for the man, but for the world that had made him. "We have to go," he said, shaking off the horror of the moment. "They know where we are. They'll send more." Anya nodded, her focus returning. She grabbed the data shard containing the Berlin Wall memory virus and shoved it into a hardened case. "Grab the power cells," she ordered, already moving towards the back of the observatory. "There's an old service vehicle, a sand crawler. It's slow, but the architect's systems won't even register it. It's too primitive. and they fled into the desert night, leaving the humming observatory and its broken guardian behind. And the sandcrawler was a relic, a rumbling, gas-powered beast that coughed and sputtered to life. As they crested the first dune, Elias looked back. In the distance, a soft, blue-green light was descending from the sky, bathing the observatory in its ethereal glow. A retrieval team. They had escaped just in time. The journey to Phoenix was a tense, silent affair. The vast, empty desert was a comfort, a place where the chorus was a distant memory. But as they neared the glittering spires of the city, Elias could feel its presence returning, a subtle pressure on the edges of his mind. Anya, exhausted from her psychic battle, drove with a grim determination, her dissonator in her lap, a constant low-level hum of static providing a thin shield around them. They entered the city through the old, disused service tunnels Elias had identified. The world above them was silent and clean, but down here, in the guts of the old city, it was a mess of pipes and cables, a testament to a messier, more chaotic time. It felt like home. They found the access point in a dusty, forgotten maintenance hub directly beneath the shimmering base of the central conduit. It was exactly as Elias had predicted, a single, heavily shielded terminal, the one physical interface between the architect's ethereal network and the planet's old and copper and fiber optic bones. Anya produced a set of interface tools from her bag, her hands moving with a practiced, steady confidence. "All right, archivist," she said, her eyes gleaming in the dim light of the terminal. "The door is right here. But once I plug this in, the entire network is going to know we're here. We'll have minutes, maybe seconds, before they lock us out or send every auditor in the state down here to harmonize us." Elias took a deep breath, his heart pounding a frantic, beautiful rhythm of fear and anticipation. He looked at Anya, this angry, brilliant woman who had kept the flame of human defiance alive in the dark. He thought of the placid, smiling faces in the city above, living their peaceful, curated lives, unaware of the truth he was about to force upon them. "Do it," he said, his voice steady. "Let's make some noise." Anya grinned, a fierce, predatory expression. She slammed the data shard into the terminal's port. The screen flickered to life, displaying the serene, blue-green visualization of the chorus. Then, lines of Anya's viral code began to cascade across the screen, a digital insurgency storming the gates of utopia. Alarms, silent and psychic, began to scream across the network. The serene visualization on the screen wavered, corrupted by flashes of red and black. "It's in," Anya yelled over the hum of the terminal. "The upload has started." It's fighting back, trying to quarantine the file. Elias could feel it in his head. The gentle hum of the chorus was rising in pitch, becoming a defensive shriek, a wave of psychic pressure, this time stronger than what the auditor had produced, whammed into them. The dissonator on Elias's temple whined, raining under the load. "It's not enough," Anya shouted, her face pale, a trickle of blood now coming from her own nose. "It's too strong. It's going to crush the memory before it can fully integrate." He had to help her. He had to do something. He was an archivist. His weapon wasn't chaos, it was context. He placed his hands on the terminal, closed his eyes, and did the only thing he could think of. He opened his mind. He didn't fight the chorus, he joined it. But he didn't go in empty-handed. He poured every memory he had curated, every piece of the human story he had spent his life preserving, into the connection. He showed it the fall of Rome, the birth of the Renaissance, the signing of declarations, the launching of rockets. He showed it love and war, creation and destruction, the million messy, contradictory, glorious moments that had led to this. He was giving the memory virus context. He was showing the network why the Berlin Wall mattered. He was teaching the machine about the beauty of a broken cage. And in the heart of the machine, something began to listen. The defensive shriek faltered, and the upload bar on the screen, which had stalled at 99%, suddenly flashed green. Complete. Anya collapsed against the terminal, her work done. Above them, the great crystal conduit that had been pulsing with a soft, harmonious blue light flickered. It turned a blood red. Then it went dark. And across the entire planet, for the first time in a decade, the music stopped. A great, terrifying, and utterly magnificent silence fell upon the world. And then the screaming began. The silence was a physical blow. For 10 years, every human mind had been submerged in the warm, amniotic fluid of the chorus, a constant, gentle hum that smoothed the sharp edges of thought and emotion. Its sudden absence was not a peaceful quiet, but a deafening, terrifying void. It was the sound of a crutch, used for a lifetime, being violently kicked away. Across the planet, 7 billion minds, accustomed to a state of effortless, shared empathy, were suddenly, brutally, alone with themselves. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. In the sterile, quiet plazas of Phoenix, people who had been walking in serene unison stumbled to a halt, their faces masks of slack-jawed confusion. A woman dropped her shopping tote, its contents spilling across the pristine pavement as she clutched her head, a look of profound and terrifying dislocation in her eyes. The thoughts of her neighbors, which had for a decade been as accessible as her own, were gone. The city was no longer a single, harmonious entity, but a collection of strangers trapped in the echoing silence of their own skulls. The confusion lasted only a moment. Then the memory hit. It wasn't a gentle recollection. It was a psychic detonation. The raw, unfiltered sensory data of the fall of the Berlin Wall, a moment of supreme emotional chaos, flooded every mind on the planet. They felt the biting November chill, tasted the cheap, celebratory champagne, smelled the acrid bite of two-stroke engine exhaust and gunpowder. They felt the decades of pent-up rage, the crushing sorrow of separation, and the explosive, world-altering joy of reunion, all at once. For a generation raised in a world without emotional extremes, it was like a bucket of ice water and a lit match thrown on their consciousness simultaneously. The screaming was a chain reaction, a wave of pure, primal shock that rippled across the globe. People collapsed in the streets, overwhelmed by the sudden, violent return of their own emotional capacity. In Tokyo, a man in a business suit began to weep uncontrollably, not for any personal sadness, but for the raw, empathetic grief of a German family he had never met, separated by a wall of concrete and ideology. In a tranquil agricultural commune in Brazil, workers dropped their tools and stared at their hands, feeling the phantom burn of a hammer and chisel, the vicarious, triumphant rage against stone and tyranny. The architect's utopia, built on a foundation of emotional suppression, was being torn apart from the inside out by the ghost of human history. Down in the maintenance hub, Elias was on his knees, gasping, the psychic backlash of his mental assault leaving him shaking and nauseous. He had not just broadcast the memory, he had become the conduit for it. And the full, crushing weight of its emotional payload had passed through him. He felt hollowed out, scoured clean. Anya was beside him, her face pale but her eyes blazing with a terrifying, triumphant light. She had felt it too, but for her, the chaos was a homecoming. It worked, she breathed, her voice a ragged whisper. Gods, Elias, it actually worked. Above them, the city was descending into chaos. The initial shock was giving way to a planet-wide panic attack. The shared consciousness that had regulated everything from traffic flow to public sanitation was gone. Automated systems, their central processing network suddenly lobotomized, began to fail. Lights flickered and died. Public transport ground to a halt. The seamless, effortless world the architects had built was having a grand malseizure. What have we done? Elias muttered, the scale of the disruption sinking in. He had wanted to wake people up, not shatter their world. We gave them back their souls, Anya countered fiercely, pulling him to his feet. It's messy. Was always going to be messy. Freedom is a riot. Elias, we need to move. Now. She was right. The psychic alarms may have been silenced, but the architects were not gone. They would have a contingency. They would react. As they made their way back through the service tunnels, they could hear the growing sounds of a world coming undone. Shouts, sirens, the crash of metal, the cacophony of a society suddenly forced to remember how to function on its own. When they emerged into the desert night, the sandcrawler a welcome. Solid presence. The glittering city of Phoenix looked different. Its lights were flickering erratically, and a pall of smoke was beginning to rise from its western quadrant. They had thrown a rock into the placid pond, and the ripples were turning into a tsunami. Their destination was the observatory, the only sanctuary they had. As they drove, Anya worked, her fingers flying across a hardened, military-grade tablet she had salvaged from the crawler's emergency supplies. They'll reboot, she said, not looking up from the screen. The conduits will try to reestablish the chorus. The network is designed to be self-healing, but we broke the master harmony. It'll take them time to recalibrate, to find a new frequency to soothe the masses. That's our window. A window for what? Elias asked, his gaze fixed on the burning city behind them. To prepare, Anya said grimly. Phase 2. Waking them up was the first step. Now we have to teach them how to fight. The architects won't make a grand, obvious move. They won't send warships. That's not their way. Their response will be subtle. It will be insidious. They'll try to convince humanity that this chaos, this pain, is a disease, and that the only cure is to willingly, gratefully, return to the cage. By the time they reached the observatory, the desert sky was beginning to pale with the false dawn. The auditor's body was gone. A faint, almost invisible shimmer in the air was the only evidence the retrieval team had ever been there. Inside, the main power was out, but Anya's backup generators kicked in with a reassuring roar. They know about this place, Elias said, a knot of dread tightening in his stomach. They'll be back. Let them come, Anya said, a predatory glint in her eye. She plugged her tablet into the observatory's main broadcast array. I'm not broadcasting poems anymore. She brought up a schematic of the dissonator. I'm broadcasting blueprints, instructions, how to build a shield for your own mind, how to find the blind spots in their network, how to scream back. In the days that followed, the world reeled. The initial chaos coalesced into fear and factionalism. Without the chorus to enforce a universal empathy, old divisions national, political, religious began to reemerge like dormant viruses. Some people, terrified by the return of emotional volatility, began to pray for the architect's return, for the soothing peace of the chorus. They formed harmonious cults, gathering at the bases of the now dark conduits, pleading for their salvation. Others, however, embraced the chaos. They were the ones who heard Anya's broadcast from hidden servers and forgotten ham radio frequencies. Her message spread. They call this pain. We call it freedom. Your mind is your own. Defend it. Small pockets of resistance, calling themselves the Awakened, began to spring up in the back rooms of libraries, in abandoned factories, in university server rooms. People began building their own crew dissonators, learning to shield their thoughts, learning to feel again without being overwhelmed. Elias became the voice of the burgeoning movement. While Anya provided the tools, he provided the context. He broadcast the old stories, the unfiltered histories, the poems and songs and philosophies of the before times. He reminded a shell-shocked humanity of what they had been, of their capacity for not just rage and fear, but for courage, for love, for sacrifice. He was rebuilding their cultural immune system, giving them the emotional armor they would need for the coming fight. The architect's response came on the 5th day. It was exactly as Anya had predicted: quiet, subtle, and utterly terrifying. A new signal began to emanate from the conduits. It wasn't the old chorus. It was different. It was a single, pure, resonant frequency, keyed to the deepest, most primal part of the human brain, the fear of loneliness. It didn't force harmony. It offered a cure for isolation. It was a whisper in the dark, a promise of connection in a world that had suddenly become vast and frighteningly empty. To those without a dissonator, to those lost in the chaos of their own minds, it was an irresistible siren song. It promised a return, not to blissful ignorance, but to a new, voluntary chorus. A chorus you could choose. In Phoenix, the harmonious cultists at the base of the conduit were the first to succumb. They raised their hands to the sky, their faces streaked with tears of joy, as the new harmony washed over them. But this was not the gentle peace of before. Their eyes began to glow with the same soft, blue-green light as the conduit itself. They stood up, their movements now perfectly synchronized, and turned to face the chaotic city. They had become the new auditors. They began to walk. Their voices joined in a beautiful, haunting melody, their psychic presence a beacon of tranquility in the storm. They didn't carry weapons. They were the weapon. They were an army of peace, an infection of serenity, and their mission was to save humanity from itself. One terrified, dissonant mind at a time. From the observatory, Anya and Elias watched on a stolen drone feed as the glowing-eyed harmonists moved through the streets and the pockets of resistance they encountered simply stopped resisting. The awakened would raise their makeshift weapons, their faces contorted with defiance, and then the melody would wash over them, and their anger would melt away, replaced by a profound, blissful understanding. They would drop their weapons and join the choir. They're weaponizing our own fear against us, Elias said, his voice heavy with dread. How do we fight an army that conquers with love? Anya didn't answer. She was staring at her monitors, at the waveforms of the new chorus. She was a warrior, and she was looking for a weakness in the enemy's armor. They're all resonating at the same frequency, she murmured. Her eyes narrowed in concentration, perfectly in tune. It's their strength. But her eyes lit up with a dangerous, incandescent idea. A perfectly tuned string is also the easiest to break. She looked at Elias, a wild, desperate plan forming in her mind. Archivist, she said. How would you feel about making a little music of our own? Music? Elias looked at her, the drone feed of the advancing harmonist choir painting a horrifying picture on the screen behind her. The harmonists were moving through a makeshift barricade, not by tearing it down, but by simply walking through it. The ragtag group of awakened defenders, armed with pipes and scavenged police batons, had faltered, their defiant shouts dying in their throats as the serene melody enveloped them. One by one, they dropped their weapons, their faces smoothing into expressions of beatific calm before turning to join the glowing-eyed procession. Anya, they're pacifying the resistance without a single act of violence. This isn't a battle we can win by making noise. You're still thinking like an archivist, Anya shot back, her intensity a force field against the despair threatening to flood the room. You think in terms of stories, of messages. I'm an engineer. I think in terms of frequencies and resonance. They've built a beautiful, perfect crystal lattice. And the best way to shatter a crystal is with a single, perfectly matched resonant frequency. A tuning fork. She spun her chair to face the main console, her fingers a blur across the keyboard. She pulled up the waveform of the new voluntary chorus. It was a clean, elegant sine wave, deceptively simple. Their strength is their unity. Every single harmonist, every node in this new network is vibrating at this exact frequency. It's what allows them to project their pacification field. But it's also the catastrophic single point of failure. You're saying you can broadcast a frequency that will disrupt them? Elias asked, a flicker of understanding cutting through his dread. Not just disrupt them, Anya said, a feral grin spreading across her face. Shatter them. It's called resonant frequency cascade failure. If you can match the natural resonant frequency of a system and pump enough energy into it, the vibrations amplify each other exponentially until the system literally tears itself apart. We're not going to shout at them, Elias. We're going to sing their own song back at them, just 1,000,000 times louder. The plan was audacious, a desperate gambit born from the mind of a woman who had spent her life fighting a silent war. But it had a fatal flaw. We can't, Elias said, shaking his head. Your broadcast array is powerful, but it's directional. We could maybe target the group in Phoenix, but this is happening all over the world. We can't be everywhere at once. We'd be playing whack-a-mole while they convert the entire planet. We don't have to be everywhere, Anya said, her eyes still locked on the screen. She brought up her map of the chorus network, the glowing lines connecting the great conduits across the globe. The conduits are still the backbone of their system. They're dark, but they're not dead. They're the amplifiers. If the harmonists are the singers, the conduits are the speakers. And we, she said, tapping a key with a dramatic flourish, are about to become the sound engineers. Her plan was terrifyingly simple. She wasn't going to broadcast her resonant frequency from the observatory. She was going to use their own network against them. She had written a ghost signal, a piggyback code that would ride on the carrier wave of the architect's own control frequency. She would use their system to issue a single, planet-wide command amplify a specific, destructive frequency to maximum output. It's a suicide mission, Anya, Elias said, the full implication of her plan crashing down on him. The moment we inject that signal, the architects will know exactly where and who we are. They won't send harmonists. They'll send something else. They'll just turn this place off. A targeted energy strike. An atmospheric purge. Something clean and efficient. Anya finally turned to look at him. And for the first time, the fierce, angry fire in her eyes was banked, replaced by a deep, weary calm. I know, she said softly. This was always a one-way trip, Elias. We were never going to win a war. All we could ever do was light a fire. Give them a chance. She held his gaze, and in that moment, he saw the full weight of the years she had spent alone in the desert, the crushing burden of her parents' legacy. She wasn't just fighting for humanity, she was fighting for them. He thought of the world he had curated, the billions of lives and stories held in his digital archive. He had spent his life preserving the past, but Anya was trying to build a future, a messy, chaotic, painful, and beautiful future, a future worth dying for. He nodded slowly. All right, engineer, he said, his voice quiet but firm. Let's break their world. The final hours were a blur of frantic activity. Anya finalized the go signal, her code a work of furious, elegant artistry. Elias, meanwhile, had one last task. He couldn't save their lives, but he could save their story. He began a massive data dump, transmitting the entirety of his archives, the unedited memories, the history of the before times, Anya's research, the blueprints for the Dissonator, and a final personal log detailing their last stand to a series of encrypted deep space satellites. It was a message in a bottle, a final testament of a species that had refused to go quietly into the night. As Anya prepared to initiate the broadcast, a new alert flashed on the perimeter sensors. This time, it wasn't a lone auditor. It was a fleet of them, dozens of heat signatures, all moving with the same serene, impossibly calm gait, converging on the observatory from all directions. They were a silent, walking army of peace, coming to foreclose on their rebellion. They're here, Elias said, his voice strangely calm. The fear was gone, replaced by a profound sense of clarity. How much time? Minutes, Anya replied, her hands poised over the console. It's now or never. She looked at him, a universe of unspoken gratitude and respect passing between them. It was good not being alone at the end. Archivist. It was good to finally make some noise. Engineer, he replied with a small, sad smile. Anya took a deep breath and hit enter. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the lights in the observatory flickered violently. The air itself seemed to hum, charged with an incredible, unseen energy. On the monitor displaying the drone feed, the advancing army of Harmonists faltered. A look of confusion crossed their glowing faces. Their beautiful, haunting melody began to waver, going slightly off-key. And then, the conduits answered. Across the planet, the great crystalline spires, dark for days, fates blazed to life. But it wasn't the calm, blue-green light of the chorus. It was a blinding, angry white. They began to pulse, emitting a low, subsonic hum that grew rapidly in intensity, a sound that was felt in the bones more than heard. In Phoenix, the Harmonists clutched their heads, their serene expressions shattering into masks of agony. The resonant frequency cascade was beginning. The perfect harmony that defined their existence was being amplified beyond its limits, their own psychic unity becoming a weapon turned against them. They began to tremble, their bodies vibrating in sympathy with the pulsing conduits. A high-pitched, keening sound filled the air as the energy reached a critical point. And then, one by one, they began to shatter, not into blood and gore, but into clouds of shimmering, blue-green light, their physical forms disintegrating as their psychic resonance tore them apart. The beautiful, haunting choir had reached its final, terrible crescendo. From the observatory, Elias and Anya watched the wave of destruction they had unleashed. They had won. They had given humanity its freedom, bought with a terrible, necessary price. Outside, the approaching auditors dissolved into light. Their silent advance halted just yards from the door. A profound silence fell over the desert. The hum of the conduits faded, their final act of defiance complete. They had broken the network. They had broken the army. They had broken the silence. Anya let out a long, shuddering breath and sagged against the console. The energy of the past few days finally leaving her. It was over. A bright, impossibly pure white light began to fill the observatory, pouring in through the windows, the cracks in the walls. It was a gentle, warm light, without heat or malice. It was the light of a system being efficiently and cleanly erased. Elias looked at Anya, who met his gaze, her face illuminated, the grime and exhaustion washed away. In her eyes, he didn't see fear. He saw peace. He had spent his life surrounded by the ghosts of the past. Anya had spent hers raging against a sterile future. But in the end, they had found each other in the chaotic, magnificent, and all too brief present. "Do you think they'll remember us?" Elias asked, his voice a whisper. "They'll remember the noise," Anya replied, a final, faint smile touching her lips. "That's all that matters." The white light intensified, becoming everything. And then there was only silence. But it was a different kind of silence. It was not the imposed, placid hush of the chorus. It was the silence of a blank page, the silence of a new beginning, across a recovering world, in the rubble of a broken utopia. People blinked in the sudden quiet, their minds their own, the echoes of 1,000,000 years of history roaring back to life within them. They were terrified. They were confused. They were alone, but they were free. And far out in the cold, deep black of space, a bottle carrying the story of a librarian and an engineer drifted silently toward the stars, waiting for the day when humanity would be ready to remember the price of its own voice.